The fourth and final day of the Senate confirmation hearing for Judge Amy Coney Barrett has concluded. A committee vote for her nomination to the Supreme Court is slated for a week from today. We did not see the nominee today, though we heard her name mentioned frequently. 8 witnesses testified before the committee, each highlighting the 48-year-old conservative judge's character and qualifications. But not everyone is on board with her nomination.
Judge Barrett has earned and enjoys an excellent reputation for integrity and outstanding character. Judges and lawyers alike uniformly extolled the nominee's integrity.
The standing committee concluded that Judge Barrett's integrity, judicial temperament, professional competence met the very high standards for appointment to our Supreme Court.
I'm here to raise my voice against the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett and in support of the Affordable Care Act.
As a family doctor who cares deeply about my patients, I'm grateful to be here today to advocate for them and for all patients in our great nation. And I'm here to urge against striking down this life-saving law or confirming to the Supreme Court anyone who would seek to do so. As a doctor, I can't talk with expertise about concepts like originalism or textualism. As a doctor, however, I can talk about the real-world harm of ending the ACA.
Having served 15 years on the D.C. Circuit alongside judicial appointees of every president, from Carter to Trump, I have seen firsthand that judges can and do put aside party and politics in a good faith effort to correctly interpret the law.
It's troubling that she would not recuse herself under these circumstances, and her stance sends a disconcerting message to the 17 million Americans who have voted to date, with millions more to come. These are voters who want their ballots and not an election season court pick to determine the election outcome.
We heard the ABA rate the judge as well qualified. I think the only reason why she wasn't rated higher is that there is no higher rating by the ABA. I think she's uber qualified.
Access to an abortion should not depend on our GPA, the color of our skin, where we live, or the luck of the draw. It should not depend in any shape, form, or fashion who your governor is or who is sitting on the Supreme Court.
I know Judge Barrett to be a person of the highest character, and I sincerely and enthusiastically support her nomination to be an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court.
Let's bring in our panel of Molly Hooper and Jamelle Bouie now. Molly is a CBS News political contributor, and Jamelle is a CBS News political analyst and columnist with the New York Times. Welcome to both of you for being with us. Molly, what are your initial thoughts to what we've been hearing so far today?
Well, today we're hearing from witnesses for Amy Coney Barrett as well as those opposed to Amy Coney Barrett's nomination to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. But really, for all intents and purposes, as Senator Cory Booker said earlier today during the business meeting section of the hearing, or a section of the event, the goose is cooked. The Republicans have the vote to move this nomination to the floor by next week. The Senate committee will vote on Thursday, and Mitch McConnell has said that the Senate will start her consideration on Friday. So really, for all intents and purposes, it looks like this nomination is going to move through and be confirmed before the election. That's pretty much the big takeaway that I came away from today's hearing.
And Jamelle, what about you? Is there anything in particular that is standing out to you as we listen to these, several days of hearings?
Yeah, I had much the same takeaway as Molly, that this is going to happen, this confirmation is going to happen. Republicans have the votes. The principal argument that Republicans are making, beyond anything about Barrett herself, is that this is constitutional, that the Senate has the authority to nominate and confirm a judge or a justice whenever a vacancy shall arrive. And the Senate is doing its duty. Lindsey Graham, the chair of the Judiciary Committee, said as much on the first day of hearings. I think, and I wrote about this, that this argument is something Democrats should keep in mind should they win the Senate and the White House and take power next year and seek to do something about the fact that this confirmation happened so close to the election.
Mm-hmm. And so before we get to the witness testimony of today, I want to first play an interesting moment involving Illinois Senator Dick Durbin. There has been a lot of criticism from Democrats over the last few days over Judge Barrett not answering seemingly simple questions. So take a listen to what the Senate Minority Whip had to say about this.
It even reached the point where Senator Kennedy asked this learned attorney, professor, and jurist if she had any opinion on the issue of climate change. And basically she said, never thought about it. Don't have any views. What are we dealing with here? We're not dealing with the reality of who this person is and what she believes, but some kind of artifice that we have constructed between the nominee and our questions. I would be afraid to ask her about the presence of gravity on Earth. She may decline to answer because it may come up in a case. It could come before the court someday.
So, Jamel, we did see her answer questions in the affirmative. There are some objective truths that she holds, such as COVID-19 is contagious, but others she does not seem to hold as objective truths. So, Jamel, what is the true argument then that Democrats and Senator Durbin are trying to make here?
I think Democrats are simply trying to point out that this confirmation hearing has something of the appearance of a farce. And just watching over the past couple of days, it is hard as a viewer to take it seriously when Barrett is being asked questions about things that she has actually written on, or that we actually know that she has views on, and then insisting that she has there's no place for her to answer those questions, and essentially asking for a lifetime appointment to this court. So I think that's the point Democrats are trying to make, that this whole thing is somewhat farcical, and we sort of know the outcome from the outset. And I think, as I said, I think that if you're thinking politically about this, what Democrats should be taking into consideration then is what do they intend to do about all of this once they have, if they attain the power to do something, versus trying to, prevent something that is surely going to happen.
Right. So, Jamel, would you agree that Republicans are clearly playing the long game here? Because in the sort of, the immediate aftermath of this is that pushing through a Supreme Court justice so close to Election Day may not be the most popular move for voters who are more concerned about Congress sitting down and getting a COVID relief package pushed through. Republicans are clearly aware of this. So do you think that they are simply playing a long game here?
I think that's right. It's been sort of the goal of the conservative legal movement, certainly many conservative Republicans over the past 30 years, 40 years even, to build a durable conservative majority on the Supreme Court, a conservative majority that would understand the Constitution in conservative ways and act to bring that understanding to bear on American policymaking. And so if I were in their place, right, if I had this goal, I would probably take the same action, right? Why would you give up the possibility of this very momentous victory, a sort of 6-3 conservative majority on the court, something which has not existed for a very long time, if ever. There's always been, the majority's been 5-4 for the last few decades. Before the New Deal, it's sort of hard to bring our current ideological labels to the past. And so this specific kind of conservatism may attain a foothold that it's never had before. And it makes total sense that Republicans would sort of disregard their own statements, disregard potential repudiation from voters to achieve this kind of singular goal.
So, Molly, continuing along the lines of what, Jamel just said there, could that explain some of the Republicans' obsession with Democrats stacking the courts? I mean, they may look ahead to an American demographic that's changing. They may see, the end of the Trump era sooner or later, but there will be an end. They may look so far down the line that they think, okay, we've set up the court the way we need it to be, at least for quite a while. Now, the only thing that could get in the way of our plans is Democrats stacking the court.
Well, I think, I'm not sure if it's so much stacking the court as it is packing the court. In other words, adding more members to sit on the Supreme Court, because in the Constitution it doesn't say they have to be 9. In fact, I think the Supreme Court started out as 5 guys, and that number changed in the 1800s to 9, and it stayed the same since then. And so what we've been hearing on the trail and from some Republicans is this worry that if the Democrats win control of the House and the Senate, and they win the White House, that there would be an effort to change the statute and increase the number of justices who sit on the Supreme Court, therefore changing that calculation. Because once you up the number, say you up it to 11, you can add 2 more justices, or 13. You can add more justices who subscribe to a more activist persuasion when it comes to interpretation of the Constitution. And that, I think, is a Republican fear. But, Republicans have been doing this for a long time. This has been something that they have wanted to do, as long as I've been covering Congress, and that's been a while. I won't tell you how many years, but Democrats want to do it as well. As soon as there's openings in the federal judiciary, they want to fill those. And it used to be very difficult to do that because until 2013, either side in the minority could essentially filibuster a nominee. And that all changed under Harry Reid when he said, we're doing away with the filibuster for these judicial nominees, which kind of opened another can of worms that takes us to this point right now. And it's what Sheldon Whitehouse warned Republicans against. If you go down this road and push through this nominee, just don't complain when we do it and when we're in control.
Right. But if you look at the political landscape of the United States and you look at the direction some trends may be leading us, you could see a place where the Supreme Court might not reflect what the majority of Americans are, looking to see. Not in terms of legislature, but in terms of upholding certain, legislature. And you could see a place where that creates problems. Couldn't you, Molly?
Well, sure, but here's the point. Here's something that Amy Coney Barrett said very clearly. It is not up to justices to make law. It's up to you. It's up to you, Congress, to make law. And you need to act, and she didn't say this part, but if you want to change the abortion laws in this country, do something about it. If you want to change environmental laws, do something about it. If you want to change immigration, do something about it. Congress and the president have not been able to do anything legislatively, if you look at immigration reform, for decades. And so that's why these issues end up in the Supreme Court and in the justice system, because Congress has failed to act. And really, I'm not sure what it's going to take, because I've been talking to a lot of lawmakers recently about what it will take to change the way Congress works. And it seems like it's so divided right now that they need to have some reckoning soon to kind of get on the same page.
But of course, but laws can be enacted and then struck down by the court, which happens, all the time. Jamel, you wrote a recent op-ed in which you said, among many things, that Democrats needed to fight fire with fire in these hearings. What do you mean by that, and do you believe that they've succeeded?
So what I was arguing, and this gets to this the point Judge Barrett made about Congress needs to pass laws. I think the fear Democrats have, the fear progressives have, is that they will pass laws, and these laws will be struck down, and will be struck down not on the basis of a neutral understanding of the Constitution, but by what essentially is conservative judicial activism. So the example usually given is what happened to what happened to the Voting Rights Act, which was unanimously reaffirmed by Congress in 2006. And in 2013, in Shelby County v. Holder, Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the majority, invalidated the key section of the act that helps protect voting rights in states that have histories of discrimination and disenfranchisement. And the argument that the Chief Justice made was that it was unfair to treat states differently. And critics of this ruling have said that not only does that doctrine sort of not exist in constitutional law, or it didn't exist, but effectively invalidates the second section of the 15th Amendment. And so progressives look at that and say, we can craft laws that are well within keeping of past rulings, of past precedent, But a conservative Supreme Court that simply does not believe, regardless of precedent, that the Constitution says these things may strike these down. And there's no way we can craft a law that can circumvent or get ahead of an activist-minded court. And so my argument is that if that's true, and if Republicans are going to sort of solidify this majority, and what Democrats should do when they have power is add more seats to the court. The Constitution empowers them to do that just as much as it empowers Republicans to push through nominees. And if Republicans are going to say, oh, the rules are the rules, we can do what the rules say, then I think Democrats should say the same, because the rules also say that expanding the court is completely fine.
Right, and so that's why I think that some point out that Judge Barrett's answer about legislators legislating and not judges is a little disingenuous, because like you said, yes, that is the rule of the court, is not to legislate. I mean, the role of the court is not to legislate, but like you said, laws can be passed. They can be passed, with an eye to precedent, and all your ducks can be in a row, but a court can still strike them down. So,
but you can also, but also what we aren't mentioning is you can amend the Constitution, and I mean it's very difficult to do that. But you can. There is a way to amend the Constitution, and it's happened a number of times since the Constitution has come into existence. But it's a very high bar. But once it's done, it's hard to argue with that. And so there are ways to change the laws so that they stick. But a more, I guess you could say, quick and expedient way to do it is to perhaps add more justices to the Supreme Court, which is something that Democrats have been considering. And given how this nomination has been moved through so quickly, it's something that they are considering.
Absolutely. It's certainly, it's in the balance. And as you pointed out, Jamel, Republicans pushing through a Supreme Court nominee this close to the election is not winning them any points from the Democrats' perspective. All right. Well, Molly Hooper and Jamel Bowie, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Senator Kamala Harris is suspending all campaign travel after 2 of her staffers tested positive for the coronavirus. The Democratic vice presidential nominee says her communications director, Liz Allen, and a flight crew member have been infected. Senator Harris tested negative on Wednesday and was scheduled to go to North Carolina today. The Biden campaign says she was not in close contact with either staffer and does not need to go into quarantine. That announcement comes as President Trump and Joe Biden are set for dueling town hall events in prime time. The candidates will take questions from everyday Americans at 8 p.m. Eastern on separate networks. The events replace the second presidential debate, which was canceled because of Mr. Trump's refusal to participate in a virtual event despite his positive COVID-19 diagnosis. CBS News White House correspondent Paula Reed has more on the campaigns.
Barron is just fine now. He's tested negative, right?
President Trump is using his son Barron's recovery from COVID to urge schools to reopen.
Because it happens. People have it and it goes. Get the kids back to school.
Dr. Anthony Fauci told CBS Evening News anchor and managing editor Norah O'Donnell Wednesday the president is not likely to transmit the virus on the campaign trail, but still warned against holding large gatherings.
I can't advise the president about what he can do and should do with regard to political campaigns, but I can reiterate my statement that when you have congregate settings of a lot of people together, closely packed, when most are not wearing masks, that is a risk situation to be avoided.
Over 216,000 people in the U.S. have died and cases are rising across the country. Iowa has had more than 100,000 COVID cases and hospitalizations are increasing. Voters in the battleground state overwhelmingly say the economy is their biggest concern, but the president focused the first half of his speech on attacking his rival.
And And this is a big smoking gun.
With weeks until the election and trailing in the polls, President Trump seized on a report in the New York Post published Wednesday claiming files and emails were taken from a laptop that allegedly previously belonged to Hunter Biden. The report alleges that the former vice president used his position to advance his son's business interests in Ukraine and that both Bidens were not truthful about that relationship.
Vice President Biden, you owe the people of America an apology because it turns out you are a corrupt politician, okay?
The Biden campaign said the allegations were false and noted that an investigation by Senate Republicans had cleared the former vice president of any wrongdoing in Ukraine. The story's sourcing has also raised questions about its authenticity, as the files were given to the Post through an attorney for the president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, and allegedly obtained from a repair shop owner who said the device was allegedly left and never picked up.
And Paula Reed joins me now from the White House. Hi, Paula. So before we talk about tonight's town halls, I want to ask about Senator Harris suspending travel with her campaign. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, Tanya, we've learned that two people on the campaign, related to the campaign, I should say, have both tested positive. One was a flight crew member and the other was Liz Allen, her communications director. And while the campaign says that the senator didn't have any close contact as defined by the CDC with either one of these two people, she doesn't have any requirement to quarantine, but they are still going to suspend in-person campaigning events through Sunday. She will still do, though, they said, some virtual events. And we can actually hear, Tanya, right now, the president is taking off in his helicopter to head to his town hall event this evening.
And Paula, our CBS News Battleground Tracker projects Joe Biden has a lead in enough states that would give him the election. So how can we expect the president to use tonight's town hall to try and convince those voters in Midwestern and Southern states considered toss-ups or even leaning blue that he is the candidate for them?
The president really needs to crystallize his message, especially for those voters who are on the fence, independents, women, people who don't like him as a person, but might consider voting for him in spite of his Twitter account. So far, though, he has not used many of these campaign stops to really hammer home a very effective message. Last night, for example, in Iowa, where overwhelmingly voters say that their top issue is the economy, the president spent the first half of his campaign event railing against the investigations into his administration and really seizing on these recent reports about the former vice president's son, Hunter Biden. The president's also tried this week to appeal to suburban women voters, asking them to love him. He really, when he's speaking to them, he really emphasizes trying to keep low-income housing out of suburban areas. If you speak with most suburban women, though, Tanya, of course, zoning laws aren't necessarily at the top of their list of priorities right now. They're concerned about schools for their children, seeing their parents, their jobs, jobs of their significant others. So again, the president's messaging has not been clear, it has not been tailored, and it has certainly not been consistent. So how he will use this town hall today, again, it's an opportunity, but it's unclear if he's really going to present a clear and effective message to the people whose hearts and minds he needs to convert over the next 2.5 weeks.
And Paula, we did hear Dr. Fauci warn our Norah O'Donnell about the health risks of holding large in-person rallies. We know the coronavirus has killed more than 217,000 Americans. Nearly 900,000 Americans filed for unemployment benefits last week, which ends a month-long decline in new weekly claims. So considering all of this, why does the president still seem to believe that downplaying the pandemic is an effective strategy when so many Americans support measures like mask wearing and are waiting for an update on stimulus talks?
Tanya, still competing with a helicopter here for the president, but the president has wanted to emphasize the upside, the positive. He's even said that he wants to downplay the risks to give people hope. He anticipated that if he gave people hope, perhaps they would be more willing to send their children back to schools, which makes it easier for parents to get back to work. And he hoped that that would all help buoy the economy and potentially propel him to re-election in November. That's been his strategy. although it does not appear that it has worked in the way he would have expected. Now, when it comes to a possible stimulus package, it is still not looking very likely that there is actually going to be a deal, even though both sides keep talking about it. Earlier today, the president said he would be willing to go above the current $1.8 trillion proposal. At this point, it appears that both sides, while they're willing to talk about what they would do, it does not appear that there have actually been positive developments to get them closer to the kind of deal that could actually pass. At this point, Tanya, it appears to be a lot of political theater and neither side really wanting to walk away, because then for the next 2.5 weeks, their rival would be able to point and say, well, that side walked away and that's why you didn't get your stimulus check.
Right. I know you're battling a lot of noise there, Paula. Thank you for sticking with us. I just want to ask you also about this report in the New York Post. CBS News has not verified the tabloid's allegations about Joe and Hunter Biden and is doing its own reporting to independently assess its veracity. But what more can you tell us about this report, and how are the Biden campaign and social media platforms reacting?
So I think now all 3 helicopters that participate in the president's arrival and departure, I think they have all departed now, Tanya. So I can tell you that, look, the Biden campaign, they note that a Republican-led Senate investigation cleared the former vice president of any wrongdoing related to Ukraine. And now when it comes to how this story is being amplified, it's been interesting that Facebook and Twitter have limited the distribution of this story. Twitter even suspended the Twitter account of the White House press secretary Kayleigh McEnany for a time when she tried to share this story. And in many ways, their efforts to control how widely the story is disseminated, that actually made the story even bigger. And Twitter was forced to come out and clarify why they took this action. Twitter says that they were concerned that the New York Post story actually contained personally identifying details, like personal email accounts. They also said they believe some of this material may have been hacked. So Twitter argues that it is against their user policy to share personal information or information that has been hacked. But conservatives, and in particular this White House, they're crying foul. They're arguing that stories that are not favorable to the Democratic candidate are being censored. In many ways, the story really has become how social media has handled and try to perhaps clamp down on some hacked materials being distributed. A lot of open questions about whether they should be doing that, how effectively they're doing it, and certainly a lot of criticism for how poorly they have communicated over the past 24 hours their reasons for trying to slow the distribution of this story.
For sure. All right. Well, Paula Reed, thank you so much. With just 19 days until the election, Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden is raising record amounts of cash. The former vice president says his campaign raised $383 million in September. His campaign manager also says they have $432 million in cash on hand. Meanwhile, the Democratic National Committee has released a new ad featuring former President Barack Obama, who will soon be on the trail for his former running mate.
The 2020 election isn't a few weeks away. It's already here. Millions of Americans are already voting. Make sure you stand up and join them.
CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe has more on how the campaign is stepping up its efforts.
Joe Biden is now sitting on a record-sized campaign war chest, $383 million raised in the month of September alone. And top aides say there's a total of $432 million still in the bank.
That's more money I've ever raised my whole life.
How the Biden campaign plans to spend the money is unclear. But this week alone, it's spending more than $24 million to advertise on TV in 16 battleground states. Even on Wednesday, Biden was raising money at a private virtual fundraiser and will do so again today before appearing tonight at a televised town hall meeting with voters. And then there's former President Barack Obama.
Hey, Georgia, Barack Obama here.
He's expected to campaign for Biden in the closing days of the election in key battleground states. Appearing on the popular Pod Save America podcast, he had a message for Democrats discouraged by party leaders not pushing harder for more liberal priorities.
It's just that we don't yet have the votes and the clout. So progressives, if you want progressive legislation, get out there and keep working after the president is elected.
Ed O'Keefe, CBS News.
Not enough beds. Ahead on Cbsn, officials open field hospitals in parts of Wisconsin as coronavirus cases surge in the state. It's not the only part of the country seeing a dramatic rise in new patients. And as the number of COVID cases surge, so does the number of people looking for work. We look at how even more cases could impact the already struggling economy. Stay with us. You're streaming Cbsn. Nearly 700,000 Americans have tested positive for the coronavirus in just the past 2 weeks. Dozens of states report spikes in cases as the number of total cases in the U.S. nears the 8 million mark. 217,000 Americans have lost their lives due to the pandemic. A top college football coach is among the newest coronavirus patients. Alabama's Nick Saban announced he contracted the virus. CBS News correspondent Mola Lenghi reports.
Six-time national champion coach Nick Saban of the Alabama Crimson Tide has been sidelined by the coronavirus, as has the school's athletic director. But Saban says as of now, there's no indication of a team-wide outbreak.